Welcome to this Inspire Europe webinar on welcoming researchers at risk, new consideration or considerations for new organisations. Just going to open up the PowerPoint here for everybody. Welcome everyone to this is our first Inspire Europe webinar in a series of webinars. It's going to explore the whole area of preparing the work environment in an academic and a non-academic setting to welcome researchers at risk. And we would very much like to hear from you and to get your ideas and suggestions for future webinar topics on this area. For those of you who are attending live today, at the end of this webinar, you'll be taken to a short survey that will ask a number of questions about the webinar and would also give you an opportunity to share your ideas and suggestions for future topics. For those of you who are watching this recording of this, you can go and email us at inspireurope@mu.ie with your ideas and suggestions for future topics. Also, if you'd like to join the Inspire Europe mailing list to get updates on projects and future events, please write to inspireurope@mu.ie and let us know that you would like to be added to the mailing list. My name is Orla Duke. I am the Programme Manager at Scholars at Risk, hosted at Maynooth University in Ireland. And I'm delighted to be joined today by a number of expert panelist speakers. You can hopefully see on your screens, we have Marit Egner, who's the Senior Advisor at the Department of Research at University of Oslo. Marit is also the institutional contact for Scholars at Risk at the university. We're also joined by Serena Rosenthal, who's the Senior Program Officer for Protection Services at Scholars at Risk in New York. And Bodil Stelwagen, who's the Scholars at Risk Program Coordinator at the Foundation for Refugee Students, UAF, in the Netherlands. And we're also delighted to be joined by our researcher at risk, who is now based in Europe, and they will speak about their own experience and advice they have for organizations. Just to note that this researcher at risk is speaking on the grounds of anonymity, and you will not therefore see their faces. They have just the icon there of the Inspire Europe logo. So first of all, I just want to give some introductions on how the webinar will work. As we have a number of attendees joining the webinar today, the audio function has been muted for attendees, but you can raise questions at any time during the webinar by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and typing in your question into that empty field. If you would like to raise your question anonymously, there is a button that you can tick, or a tick box, to send my question anonymously. And please tick that before you hit the send button if you would like your name not to be shown. The Q&A session will happen after the panelists have spoken, and hopefully we'll have enough time to go through all the questions then. If by any chance we run out of time, we will follow up afterwards with you directly. And we will also put an FAQ on the website. And just to say from the outset that this presentation and a recording of this webinar will be put up on the Inspire Europe website, and a link will be sent to you in the coming days. So just to say that this is a very introductory session. A lot of these topics, particularly the area of the practicalities of welcoming researchers at risk and making the most out of the stay, could and may very well be webinar topics in their own right. But for today, we are doing an introduction to these areas. So just to explain what will happen today, I will give a short introduction on the Inspire Europe project. Marit will explain briefly some of the terminology and vocabulary used in the project, and also how you can get started in potentially hosting a researcher at risk. Serena will then talk us through getting started and how to select and welcome a researcher. And then Marit will briefly look at making the most out of the stay. Bodil will then look at various arrangements and services that will be provided or can be provided at host organisations. And as I said, we will also hear from the researcher at risk who is now based in Europe. Marit will look at next steps, and then we will have our question and answer session afterwards. So that is the focus of the webinar. Just to look at Inspire Europe and to give you some overview of the project itself, the title comes from the initiative to support, promote and integrate researchers at risk in Europe. It is a 3-year project, started last September and will run until the end of August 2022. It's a 10-partner consortium which is led by Scholars at Risk Europe, based at Maynooth University in Ireland. And please do go on to our website. The website address is listed there, and also to our Twitter account to keep up to date with events and activities that are happening over the course of the project. The objectives of Inspire Europe. The first one is to lay a groundwork for a long-term cross-sectoral European support structure, and an Inspire Europe coordinating committee has been established to promote that. The second area is to contribute to informed policy making in Europe. And this area is mainly looking at mapping existing support mechanisms that are in place in Europe, both at an EU level and at national level, to support researchers at risk, and to come up with policy recommendations that can improve those. The third area is to bridge the gap between national and European support mechanisms and between academic and non-academic sectors. And to do this, there will be 3 key stakeholder fora, the first of which will be held in June of this year in Paris. And for more information on that, please do go to our Inspire Europe website. The fourth area is around improving career development opportunities for researchers at risk. This will involve a number of initiatives. There will be webinars similar to the one today, and one was held last week, which focused on how to apply for EU funding for researchers. There will also be training programs, and a one-to-one pilot coaching program will also take place. The fifth area, and this relates to today's webinar, this is all about how to prepare the work environment to welcome and support researchers at risk, both in academic and non-academic settings. And the last area of work is to grow the diversity of actors supporting researchers at risk. And this has a very strong focus on Central, Southern, and Eastern Europe. And we have 2 key partners, one based in Greece and one based in Poland, to support us in that. So I will now pass on to Marit, who will talk us through the vocabulary and also how to get started. Thank you, Marit.
Thank you, Euler. I will first say something about the wording that we're using. You have heard probably several variations of wording. You're using the researcher at risk, and this is coming from the Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions. A researcher at risk is a researcher, a person active in research, including at the training level of at least postgraduate and equivalent level, and includes all stages of researchers' careers by be they doctoral candidates or highly experienced researchers. And this means that it's in the EURACCESS system, it's all the way from stage 1 to 4, including PhD candidates. When we're talking about at risk, this is researchers who are at risk in their countries of origin due to discrimination, persecution, suffering and violence, or are seeking refuge out of these reasons or have recently found refuge in Europe. This means that we're talking about both those who are coming directly from their home countries on temporary researcher work permits, and also those who recently came to Europe as asylum seekers or refugees. So we have different kinds of residence permits for these researchers, but they have many of the same challenges. And then we're talking about host organizations. This is not from Marie Curie actions, but what we're using this for is organizations, institutions, or businesses welcoming researchers at risk to do relevant activities in the organization through employment, fellowship, or internship. It means that this can be both universities, but not always, and it can also be other kinds of employers. And the way of connection can be both being employed, but also having an externally funded fellowship or coming on an internship. If you're interested in hearing more about the challenges and risk situations in the countries of origin, then we would suggest that you turn to the Free to Think reports by Scholars at Risk, where you can read much more about the risk situations that people are leaving. But this webinar will focus on the work that we're doing in Europe or in host countries for those who are coming. There are many different networks and programs supporting researchers at risk. So we will mention some of the most important ones. One that is also a partner in this project is Scholars at Risk. It is a university network of more than 500 universities in around 40 countries. These are the universities that are hosting many of the researchers at risk. Then we also have the Scholar Rescue Fund, which is a funding scheme under the Institute of International Education. They give some funding, and it can be combined with hosting at the Scholars at Risk university or higher education institution. And it's covering all around the world. Then the Philipp Schwarz Initiative is a funding scheme under the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation in Germany, and they are funding hosting situations in Germany. Then we have the PAUSE program, which is a French program in the Collège de France, and this is a funding scheme for connecting researchers at risk with French universities. And then we have UAF, which is a funding scheme and also coaching in the Netherlands for at-risk researchers and students. And in the United Kingdom, we have CARA, which is a network more like Scholars at Risk. And actually, Philipp Schwarz, PAUSE, UAF, and CARA are all connected to Scholars at Risk, coordinating activities in their countries. In addition, we do have the Bridge 1 and 2 projects. Here you can find a lot of information about various aspects connected to hosting, but it's not really a full scheme, and it's also ending very soon as a project. Then there are various national programs for refugees, and we're not like giving details on all of this, but it's good to check out opportunities in your country. And then there are also a number of fellowships and types of external funding that is available for all scholars, but can also be available for refugees. And for example, in the Marie Sklodowska-Curie Actions, individual fellowships, there are special opportunities for refugees, which is relevant to explore. And then you could also have a look at the webinar that we had 2 weeks ago about that specific topic. Then I will leave the floor to Sarvina, who will give more details about the starting of the process.
All right, thank you, Marit. So I will try to be fairly brief when I'm talking about building interest on campus and starting to identify a scholar and or researcher at risk, and how to make sure that the supports are in place when they arrive on campus. Much of what I will be talking about is also delineated in the Scholars at Risk How to Host Handbook, which is available on our website. So if you need more information, that's a great resource. But essentially, first, I just want to say that it's wonderful that so many of you are interested in creating opportunities and strengthening opportunities for supporting researchers at risk at your campus, whether that's the first time or whether you're just strengthening what you're already doing. So as you likely know, the first step is raising awareness and garnering interest among your colleagues on campus. It's very helpful to articulate why it's important to support researchers at risk, especially now, both to support individuals and also to protect academic freedom worldwide. At Scholars at Risk, we recommend a committee model where a number of academics or members of your institution work together to define what your program at your institution might look like and to share responsibilities. This helps to sort of show a broad interest across the academic community or institution community. It also helps to preserve longevity of the program so that the responsibilities don't sit with one person. And of course, when a researcher at risk is on campus, that really allows for some holistic support. And we see committees that involve anyone from the university president and provost to departmental contacts, members of the international office, and even students. Beyond that, the next step is often identifying financial resources. So I'll start with identifying internal financial resources because I think that's generally the first step in beginning a process of bringing a researcher at risk to your institution. At Scholars at Risk, we've seen a variety of combinations of very creative ways to fund programs for researchers at risk. Like I've noted here, funding often comes from the central administration or the department that's interested in inviting a scholar. But we've also seen some creative efforts for student fundraising, posting opportunities for positions that haven't been filled, thinking about ways to really bring someone into the university that through opportunities that might not have been filled or available previously. I know that this is a question that many have, so we'll likely come back to it, but I'll be brief on that regard. I think when you are building interest and identifying financial resources, it's helpful to articulate why it's important to bring a researcher at risk and what they can offer that's unique that might not be provided on campus already. And so thinking about the importance of protecting academic freedom and the new academic expertise that someone might be bringing from their country or from their discipline that's not already available within your institution is quite helpful. So once you have a committee established, you can work together to think about what types of responsibilities it would be helpful for a new researcher at risk to undertake, whether that ranges from research, participating in an ongoing research team, or working on your own academic research, to teaching, filling courses that might not be covered yet, and anywhere in between that might be a fit for your institution. I think something that we often say at Scholars at Risk is that while it's of course important to provide opportunities for academics who are restricted in their own countries, it's really important that these opportunities are beneficial to all involved, to both the university and the researcher at risk, so that it really is a productive opportunity. I think what we see on average at Scholars at Risk is that positions tend to be 1 year, sometimes with the opportunity to extend if the match is really strong. And the responsibilities, like I said, can really vary based on what the university or the institution needs, as well as what the scholar and researcher at risk is able and interested in offering at the university. But like I said, that's something that really can and should vary according to the needs of your institution and what your committee is looking for. And lastly, it is important to think about external resources, both for financial support, but also I think it's really important to remember that there is a large community already working on supporting researchers at risk and thinking about these notions of academic freedom. And so it's important to tap into the existing programs, both to think about funding opportunities and ways that you can learn from one another. I know in particular in the Scholars at Risk network, we have a section model so that universities that are in a specific country or region can really work together to think about the specific needs that might exist within a regional location, and also the ways that things have been really productive and supportive on campus. this is really important work. It can be challenging to really get started. And so learning from one another and knowing that there is such a large community can be quite helpful. So I think next slide. All right, so once you have garnered interest on campus and begun to start the process of bringing your researcher at risk, it's important to then think about how you select the individual who might be the right fit for your institution. Like I said before, one thing that we really stress at Scholars at Risk is that it's important to ensure that the researcher who's coming is a strong academic match for the academic mentor, as well as the wider academic community or research community at your institution. So like I've said here, one thing that's quite important is understanding what the purpose of hosting an at-risk researcher is for you and for your wider community. There's of course an importance of creating solidarity with fellow academics who've been threatened and can't continue their work in their country. There's a wider importance of protecting academic freedom worldwide. And this is an opportunity to really learn from others in a way that you might not have just from the scholars and academics who are currently at your university. The other aspects that I've listed here can really be broken down into academic match, risk and current situation, and then capacity on campus. So when we review applications for assistance at Scholars at Risk, we look at an individual's academic background, including their discipline and field, their academic expertise, including teaching and publications, and what they're hoping to do on a new campus. And we would encourage the members here to do the same, to think about what experience is of interest to you and how a new researcher at risk could contribute that expertise. Beyond that, it is important to consider a researcher at risk's current situation and their risk narrative, both to understand the urgency of when they're seeking new opportunities, and of course to think about the ways that you can provide support once a researcher at risk is on campus, whether that's helping them adjust to a new environment, thinking about additional supports that might be necessary to succeed in a new academic space, including things like language courses, community groups, access to education for family members and things like that. And then the last thing to really think about are the supports that members of your community can provide to new researchers. We want this to be a beneficial opportunity for all involved. And so having as much information about the individual coming to your campus will be helpful in feeling like you're prepared and informed and really in a position to provide support. And then the next step is really preparing the practical preparations for when you have identified a researcher at risk and you are in a position to bring them to campus. In many ways, the preparations here are going to be similar to any preparations for an international visiting scholar. So that includes preparing a contract, connecting the new researchers with immigration contacts on campus, thinking about things like visas and travel, and really just making sure that they have the contacts necessary to get started with those processes. I know that a number of you are in various universities and countries, so the visa specifics will be different according to where you are, which is part of the reason that it's important to connect with others who have done this work before. Beyond that, I think there are some specific things to think about when inviting a researcher at risk in particular. Security preferences are incredibly important. So many of the scholars that we work with have varying degrees of security preferences once they arrive on a new campus in safety. Some prefer to be more anonymous and actually use pseudonyms on campus, whereas others use their name and practice as normal, but don't necessarily want to be referred to as a scholar at risk or a researcher at risk because it's important to really focus on the academics. And then there are other researchers at risk who may want to speak very openly about their experience with risk. And so in our view, it's important to have conversations with the researchers before coming and when they're on campus to really understand their needs, to support them and to respect their security preferences. Additionally, things like identifying housing before a researcher arrives can be incredibly helpful, especially for those who are coming directly from their country of origin and risk situation, just to make sure that the transition is as smooth as possible. But of course, that's not always possible. So identifying resources for affordable housing can be helpful as well. I think something perhaps Marit has more experience with as well are some things that you wouldn't necessarily think of as challenges, but getting set up with national IDs or social security numbers and starting a bank account are things that they're so minute, but when you get to a new country and really want to get started with your academic work, they can be it can be important to know how to do that and know how to do that quickly. So identifying perhaps contacts on campus ahead of time that can help with those administrative and logistical details can be critical. And then lastly, preparing for actually having a researcher at risk on campus is incredibly exciting and important. And so similarly, I think you would develop a new employee orientation, as you likely do with any new employees, make sure that they're connected with mentors and academic contacts, as well as the international office, which can be incredibly helpful. I think as we all probably have felt at different points in our lives, it's really nice to know who you can go to ask questions and to help orient yourself to a new environment. And that's exactly the same here. Lastly, I think most of the scholars that we work with at Scholars at Risk really just want the opportunity to continue their work. Many have been restricted or have had limited access to opportunities to do so in recent years. And so I've found that the scholars I work with are really eager to just get to a new university and start working. But it's important to also allow time for adjustment. Getting to a new country and orienting yourself can be challenging in new ways. And so we think that generally just preparing and making sure that there's an open line of communication between the employer and mentors and the researcher at risk, as well as any supporting organizations, can really make it so that there's a successful placement opportunity, so that everyone involved is really, feels supported and feels like they can make sure that researchers at risk really have the opportunity to continue their work in safety.
And over again to Marit, who's going to look a little bit on making the most out of the stay. And also just a reminder you can keep asking questions all through the webinar, and we will answer them when this panelist has spoken.
Okay, thank you. So, of course, I'm working at the university, and we'll look at this from the university perspective. I've been working with researchers at risk coming to the university for the last more than 10 years. And we see that there are so many things that are special for one person, but there are also a lot of things that are common. So, as Serena said, it's very important to try to make a good academic match. I mean, one of the reasons to host can be humanitarian interests or so, but it's really important to think of the academics. So to have a good academic match, and then also to have an academic mentor. The academic mentor is not necessarily like a PhD supervisor, but more someone you can talk to about academic activities and networking. So ideally, the academic mentor is a senior staff, not necessarily a leader in a leader position, but someone who has a wide experience. And the person can help with finding relevant academic networking activities, and also to discuss where to publish, how to go on, what courses to take, etc. All the researchers at risk want to be useful and valued in their host environment. I think this is important to remember, that it's not enough just to be there. You really want to contribute something. And of course, this can be in different ways, but there's a lot of things, either when it comes to the specific information on the region you come from, or that you have your field, disciplinary field, of course. In some cases, there might be some gaps when it comes to the academic career. You can think that in some countries, the scholars who are at risk might have had a period where you couldn't work, or where you didn't have access to the library or labs or other resources. So this means that in some cases, there is need for filling up those academic gaps by taking some extra courses. It could even be PhD courses, even at a mature stage, but this depends in each case, and that's why it's important to have this academic mentor who can discuss what are good opportunities. In addition to what is really to get you up to date when it comes to publications and so on, it's also relevant to think of other activities that are connected to widening the career perspectives. So one thing is to think of how to get more publications, better research, more research, but it's also to think of are there other kind of career development and competence activities you could do, such as language courses and courses in presentation, for example. It can be various things, new tools that you could use, etc. Then, of course, in order to make the most out of the stay, it's also important to know that in many cases, this researcher will need to think of a lot of things that are not directly in the position. Maybe in the institution would think mainly of the academic work, but the researcher might also think of things related to safety, well-being for him or herself, but also for the family. Either the family is with the researcher in the host country, or is still staying in the country of origin. It's always good to give information about what kind of health services are available, for example, when it comes to mental health, because this can be difficult to ask about, but in many universities there are services, and also in many of our countries there are public services available, etc. So these are important things to keep in mind. And then when it comes to networking, it's of course the responsibility of the host institution to help with academic networking opportunities, like going to relevant conferences, joining seminars, courses, that people are having lunch with you, etc. But it's also very important to have a social network, and this can be challenging. I'm coming from Norway, and in Norway it's quite difficult to get to know people, but you say that when you get a friend, then you can have a friend forever, but then to get there can be difficult. So in Norway, we would advise the researchers to join different NGOs or courses or other activities in addition to what you might be most eager to do your work, but it's also good to do some networking outside. So the institution can help with how you can do that in your country. I think this would be the main things I will say for now. Then I will leave the floor to our SARS scholar in Europe, who will talk about some experiences of what can be helpful and maybe what are some challenges.
Hello, thank you for giving me this opportunity, and thanks for SARS Solidarity to provide me this opportunity. Yeah, I came this country almost 1 year ago, and I have a perfect host here. If I start with the convenience that I experience here, I have settled in a right institution, and I have really a right contact colleagues, mentors. And they helped me to have some seminar to introduce me some people in my field, and it's also helped me to increase my academic network. And also my host institution provided me a language course. So I think the most in a new country, the most important things is to know local language if you want to stay there, if you still have a safety problem in your country. And I would suggest to people who are scholars at risk or researchers at risk should start the language course as soon as possible. And also to increase my network, of course, my host institutions helped me. And but I also try to knock all the door. I look at my departments, my colleagues' background. I look at their project, what are they working on. Then I knock the door and I talk about my background, and because they don't know you, and you should introduce yourself to them. So I talk about my project background and or my academic background, and now I'm participating in 3 projects, which is really exciting to work with a new network. And if I talk about my challenge, I think the main challenge in a new country is to be alone and to build up a social and academic network. And if you live in a small country, it's very difficult. And my suggestion will be kind of have more orientation course or some events outside of the university. And the other challenge is uncertainty, because you cannot avoid to ask yourself, okay, what's next? I have 1 year or maximum 2 years here, then what will happen? So this makes you a little bit insecure in a case and disturbing you all the time. So you feel yourself still insecure, even you are living in a safe country. So I would, I think, suggest in that case to kind of scholars at this could find or give opportunities to contribute local job networks, not only in university, because in university it's difficult to find a job and continue to your academic continue to your academic career. So I think I would suggest SAR can prepare SAR members for possible job opportunities, so that they can feel a little bit more relaxed and have another opportunities, at least not just in the universities. In our case, we have just to work in the university, and which is really difficult to find a position in the university. So, for example, if they studied economy, they could find job in bank, or if they studied education, they could find job like in schools. So I would suggest to give them more opportunities. Yeah, I think that's all that I have experienced here. Thank you very much for this solidarity.
Thank you very much for that very useful and informative input. I think it's useful for us all to have that first-hand experience as we reflect upon how organizations can best respond to the needs of researchers at risk. So many thanks for that.
You're welcome.
I would ask Bodil now to talk to us through the various arrangements that can be made at host organizations.
Thank you, Orla. Organization UAF works for a long time, especially with refugee students, and now work for 10 years together with the Scholars at Risk program. We have done a lot of placements in the years with hosting institutes, so especially university in the Netherlands and Belgium. So we have some knowledge about also the difference between researchers or scholars who come from abroad, from a country at risk, and who come here in the Netherlands at first, and also refugees with asylum status who already are in the Netherlands. And I would like to make that as a first introduction to the various arrangements, because like Merit and Serena and our SARS scholar also mentioned, security is one of the first priority of a scholar. And how can you make a secure base? This starts as well with how you arrange your hosting at the institute or organization that you're working in, especially the international employment. So you can invite an international employer. That makes a really steady base for our experience. That gives access to an existing research group where the scholar is invited and has its own role and function. This differs as well as being a guest researcher on the basis of their own research, where they are invited within a research group, but do not necessarily work together with other researchers. This can also, this can bring, that makes it that some researchers then need to make more and make a lot of effort to broaden their network within the research group. And of course, we have refugees with asylum status. We also, our organization, work together with refugees with asylum status and to find a job for on the long term in the Netherlands. This all three give different bases, and it is good to have that in mind when you are arranging a first hosting agreement. It also, for in my experience in the Netherlands, it also makes a difference if you can connect with within the diversity program within a university, and or you can connect with an international employees program. Those are more relevant on career development. We also have experience with expectation management, which I would also like to point upon. It is good to have the background of the researcher, the personal background in mind. Also to, for example, is it possible to arrange a housing for a month, for a half year, or for a year, or even longer? It is good to have that kind of expectation beforehand for the researcher. And also, what would you like to, what are you capable of to give to the researcher? Family conditions. It is in many evaluations, it is very important for every researcher that the family is okay as well. The hosting institutes may focus on the researcher themselves, but for the researcher, the family condition is very important, also for the housing condition. Then furthermore, do wishes and needs meet the possibilities? So do the wishes of the researcher meet the possibilities? For example, in the Netherlands, it is very hard to find housing, and especially family housing. This should be clarified beforehand, before someone brings their children and with them and cannot provide for a home for a long term. But especially some extra services should be taken in mind, like time for adjustment is very important, and also guidance in intercultural communication, to adjust to the academic landscape within the hosting country. We also have very good experiences with academic mentors. So I would stress that as an important point. We also arrange, if necessary, an appointment with an immigration lawyer who is specialized in the personal circumstances of the scholar. Sometimes that is needed if someone wants to stay longer than only the hosting time. So, but for now, I would like you to also to have some, also to prepare for some good time with the researcher, because it's also nice to welcome someone and in your institute, and to guide them and giving them a secure space for to cool down for a moment. So I would like to give the floor to the next person.
Thank you, Bodil. We're just going to briefly hear from Marit around next steps and advice on what to do when you're approaching or you're thinking of embarking on this, and what would be a good place to start.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for all these different experiences. And of course, it all comes up both from the researcher and from the institutions, this big question about what happens next. I think it's really important to start planning early. So almost on the way back from the airport, you can start discussing what should happen in the future. So I think all the different activities happening through the year or 2 years should be around the career development. Either it will be in this country or in another country. So when it comes to what can happen, based on my experience, we have around 5 different opportunities that I've seen, all of them from the University of Oslo. So one is to return home to the country of origin, if that is safe. Many of the scholars or researchers really want to return home to continue the important work that they are doing for their home society. In some cases, this can be possible. Maybe if you can't go back to your own city, maybe you can go somewhere else in the same country. Then there is an opportunity to get a normally announced position. Of course, in most countries, it's very strict when it comes to positions in higher education, that there should be open calls, etc. And it's important to remember that these processes take very long time. So both to prepare for being competent for it, and also the whole process is normally taking quite a long time. It could be normally announced positions in the same organization or another organization, inside academia or outside academia, in the same country or another country. But this is something to really look into all through the time. Then to obtain external funding is an opportunity. Marie Sklodowska Career Actions have special provisions for refugees, but there are also national funding opportunities that could make it possible maybe to continue to stay in the same institution with external funding, for example. And then there could be also opportunities to go to another university or organization engaged in the kind of work we're talking about today. So often a researcher would stay maybe, let's say, 2 years in Oslo, then 2 years in Gothenburg, and then finally finding another job that was announced publicly. And then finally, there is also the opportunity to apply for asylum and continue job seeking from a refugee situation. And my experience is that those who are coming as researchers at risk on researcher work permits normally think that this is kind of a last opportunity, but it is also a way to have more safety when you're doing your next steps. And many of these researchers are, based on their background, eligible for asylum in Europe. It might be different attitudes in different countries, but at least in Norway, our government has said that it's okay if someone who came in this way applies for asylum. It's the way this asylum institute is. It's what it's meant for. So this shows that there are many different opportunities, but it's really important to discuss about what to prepare for and to start planning early. That's my advice.
Thank you, Marit. And thank you to all our speakers. We are going to start now into our question and answer session. Just to say also, there's, as you can see on your screens, there is a very good document called How to Host that has been prepared by Scholars at Risk, which is available on the website. And also, if you're looking at this whole area, it's a very good document and a reference document to have. So we do have a number of questions, just starting with the first one that's come in. So what is the ratio of scholars at risk coming directly from the country where they're at risk and those who have already made it their way to a safe country? I think, Serena, would you mind? I don't know if you have data to hand on that. Would you mind answering that?
Sure. I don't have the exact data on hand, but I would say that the majority of scholars and researchers who apply for assistance with Scholars at Risk tend to be in their country or a second country that is not quite safe or doesn't have opportunities for academic advancement. That said, there are of course a number of scholars and researchers that we work with who are in a third safe country and have, might have asylum or some temporary status. And we see both types of scholars to meet our threshold for assistance because there have been gaps in opportunities and barriers to continuing their careers. That said, that data then, it's hard to have the exact data because we work with scholars and researchers for several years often. And so even if someone has applied to us initially from their country, we might still support them after they had been, like Marit said, at University of Oslo and then another university or country within the network. But I can find more specific data and they can add it to the FAQ. Great,
thank you very much. And keep the questions coming in. We have our next question is from an institution here in Ireland. They are asking that they're very interested in hosting a Scholar at Risk. Can I ask, how can we be advised on how best to engage the buy-in of university management? I know presidents are all involved in Scholars at Risk versus Universities Ireland here in Ireland, but are there any top tips for achieving full institutional buy-in? I might start, Marit, I might start with you, and then if Serena or Bodil would like to come in also.
Yeah, I can say from the University of Oslo that we have, in a way, connected the SAR work very much to the leadership of the university. So the funding comes from there, and it's also that they can use this opportunity. I mean, you're not hosting the scholar to kind of make the university known, but when you're doing this kind of work, it can also be connected to the larger work connected to academic freedom. And we try to connect events, for example, to both the situation when it comes to academic freedom in our own region or country and to what's happening around the world. So I think to really invite the leadership to present in events related to this topic, I think is a good thing. And another thing is to try to get part of a position in the administration of the university connected to this work, because then you have more opportunity to both follow up those scholars who are there, but also to get involved in more work around the scholars. So that is my advice.
Thanks, Marit. I don't know if Serena would like to add to that. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I think what Marit said, her last point about trying to get a position funded with scholars at risk written, or researchers at risk written into a position, can be really helpful to ensure that that's actually part of someone's job for longevity of the opportunity. I think one thing that we have found to be quite successful at engaging more people in this work is inviting scholars and researchers to campus so that more people have exposure to an individual who has experienced risk and who has so much to offer. I think that having that personal connection can be really helpful in sort of engaging with, you know, why it's important to really bring someone to campus and to have full buy-in.
Great. Thank you so much for that. The next one, I think, is echoing what we've said earlier on in the webinar. I work in HR at a university. It's good to note that also for an employment and settling in perspective, a one-year contract is very short. So I think this is echoing what we have said. Often it is very hard to initially get a position that is more than 1 year, but ultimately I think we're all of the opinion that we need to be working towards longer term positions, but that can also be quite difficult. I don't know, Serena, if you want to speak about experiences of organizations where they started off maybe on a shorter term and then built it up to a longer placement.
Sure. Yeah, I think with several of the universities who have hosted a number of researchers, they have found that 1 year is quite short because the adjustment period can be lengthy for some, shorter for others, but really just getting adjusted to a new academic environment can take some time. I think a lot of the universities are moving towards a model of offering a 1 year placement to start and then offering a 2nd year extension, assuming that the arrangement is positive. I think it's also important to note that many of these organizations like Scholars at Risk and SRF, UAF, CARA, as Marit noted earlier, work very closely with scholars and universities to plan for the transition. So one thing that we offer at Scholars at Risk are workshops, one-on-one sessions with scholars, as well as group workshops to really think about how to take advantage of the opportunities in such a short period of time and how to plan for a transition, whether that's within your university in the same country or in another country altogether. Because we recognize that 1 year is incredibly short. And as Marit said, sometimes you feel like you have to start planning from the point that you arrive, and that can be incredibly stressful. And so we also at SAR and at other organizations really want to think about the ways that we can provide support both to the university and to the researchers as they think about that transition.
Thanks, Serena. We've just had 2 minutes left and we've a number of questions. I think the next one is quite interesting in terms of that next steps area. Can you say more about your experiences with host institutions outside of academia getting involved in the program? I might reach out to Bodil on this one in terms of the experiences that UAF have had with linking up with diversity programs of for non-academic organizations, and how you found that experience.
Yes, thank you. It is quite what we do as being a foundation that work with refugees, refugee students, but also with refugee professionals, is that we support them in finding a job. So that is not necessarily within academia, but we also really work towards that the researchers or the scholars at risk also find a job within academia. And we do this together with different career services. Like, for example, we work together with academic transfer in the Netherlands. That is a collaboration between all universities and higher institutes, higher education institutes, and that is really focused on career and vacancies. So we make a yearly event, and last year we invited Academic Transfer to arrange a workshop on how to prepare your academic CV and how to use LinkedIn within the academic landscape. This is within academia, but also it is good to know that that the researchers can use their academic background also for other type of jobs, so that it is not a so that when they step outside of academia, it is not a step backwards, but it is a step forward towards a different kind of policy work, or we have a lot of, for example, national institutes who are looking for highly educated persons who are already finished their PhD or finished their double masters. So yeah, that is our experience, and it is we made last year more researchers found a job outside academia and within academia.
Wow, that's really interesting to hear. And just to say that this whole area of supporting researchers at risk in non-academic as well as academic settings is a key focus of Inspireurope. And if you do have ideas on areas or topics that we'd like to explore in order to create awareness of this, do please let us know at inspireurope@mu.ie. I'm sorry to say that we are out of time. For those people that we didn't get to answer your questions, we will follow up afterwards. And also to say there was a question around the slides and the presentation. They will be sent to you in an email after the webinar has finished in the coming days, and a recording will also be uploaded onto the Inspireurope website. I'd kindly ask as well that you, after this finishes, you'll be sent to a short survey about the webinar. So I would really appreciate it if you could take just a few minutes to complete that survey. It would help us as we design the rest of this webinar program. And lastly, to thank my fellow speakers and panelists. It has been a really interesting and informative session, and I thank you for your time today, and we look forward to future webinars in the future. Thank you, everybody.